Hello, I'm Dr. Stephen Hassan with another episode of the Influence Continuum. And I have with me Michelle Dowd. And Michelle, you and I did a podcast together when your fantastic book, Forager, Field Notes on Surviving a Family Cult, first came out. And really fascinating book. And combining the things you learned in a survivalist cult as a child with what we can use in the real world. Thought that was an incredible angle. And for my listeners who may have not heard that previous interview or not seen you on other things like Joe Rogan, which we're going to get into in a minute, I just want to read some of your accolades, that you're a journalism professor. You've contributed to the New York Times, the LA Times, the LA Book Review, Time Magazine, and a million other national publications. You were 2022 Faculty Lecturer of the Year at Jaffrey College, where you founded the award-winning literary journal and creative collective, the Jaffrey Review. You advise student media. You teach poetry and critical thinking at California Institutions for Men and Women in Chino, where you worked with, or you had the assistance of Manson follower, right? Leslie Van Houten, who's now out, thankfully, of the Manson cult. You're a registered yoga teacher. You're just a cool person. I haven't met you yet in person, but I'm a fan. And I'll just say you grew up in an apocalyptic cult, Christian-esque cult with no real education until you got one. And now you're a professor and a journalism person. And I asked you to come on again because I watched you for 3 hours or 3.5 hours on Joe Rogan. And I just found the conversation really interesting. So welcome, Michelle, to the Influence Continuum for a follow-up.
Thank you, Steve. It's good to see you again. You have been very influential in my understanding of the way I was raised, even though you weren't raised that way. You've helped me understand. And I wish that I had discovered you much, much earlier. So thank you for the work you do. Very valuable.
And so thank you too, because when I was listening to Joe Rogan and I was on his show actually in 2015, he was asking me what is a cult and what is mind control, and I told him about the Influence Continuum, the bite model, and he loved me. He said, "Come back, next time you're in California." I think he's since moved to Austin, Texas. But in any case, there you were. He was asking the same question. You were like, "Do you know Steve Hassan and his bite model?" And it was obvious that, oh yeah, somewhere back there. But so I was grateful that you mentioned that. But I was so interested that he was talking about people who are on online cults groups, and it's like a mental illness. And for him to be able, with his huge following, to be able to kind of put a message out of warning to people, I thought that was fascinating. So what was it like to meet Joe Rogan and tell us about your experience there?
Well, meeting Joe was actually very pleasant. I enjoyed his setup. Like from the moment they contacted me, everyone was very professional. When I got there, he had a whole team of men there in his space, a very cave-like space, which may be very different than your experience since I was in Austin. And
no, it was a man cave type thing. There was one man, not a group, but it was dark. Yeah. But it was very, whatever. Please continue.
So it was my idea to smoke a cigar. He asked me if there's anything I could, wanted. His team offered me a cocktail or something. I certainly didn't want to alter my mind in any way before going on. So I denied that. I denied caffeine. I didn't go with the coffee, but I said, hey, if you're comfortable, I'd love a cigar. And he said, that'd be awesome. And he seemed very excited by that before we even started. So I am a infrequent cigar smoker, so I know. It was a great cigar, and I'll just throw out there that his guy Nick, who Supplies, who creates his cigars, sent me a wonderful package of cigars, and I am being featured in Cigar Snob magazine next week. They're doing a profile on me, which is very funny. Because apparently, there's not a lot of women who will publicly be seen smoking a cigar. So, to me, I think one of the things that I have learned coming out of a cult is to meet people where they are, and it's nice, I think, to when in Rome, I felt like it was nice to do something that he really enjoys doing. And quite frankly, I enjoyed it too. But I also think a cigar sort of is a little bit of a symbol of freedom, especially maybe for a woman. I understand it's not a particularly healthy practice, but I think one of the things about coming out of a cult myself is I feel that if I can do things in moderation, my cigar smoking doesn't bother me. I like how much often I smoke a cigar, maybe 4 times a year. It feels like a great amount. But I think that it is really wonderful to not think of every sort of pleasure, even like minor vices, as being addictions. It's nice to have some that you can participate in. And I feel very fortunate that I can.
Yeah, and to like joy and happiness and volitional, actions is life sustaining, really. So people are
Absolutely.
like,
And
I like to cheat on this and have chocolate, or I like to have this or that. And it's like in moderation, it's life's short and enjoy yourself.
yes. And I honestly loved that Joe was open to hearing about, perspectives, not just with me, but with other people that are controversial and that, bother a lot of other people. And I certainly got feedback on what I said about the Bible, whether it was true, not from Joe, but from other, listeners.
Sure.
And I feel like it's a hot topic. It wasn't something I intended to go into. I had no desire to discuss religion on that show, but it was what he wanted to hear about. And I think at the end of the day, religion is just one method of control. High control groups often use religion, but they use other things as well, right? Like anything. And that's what he got into. It's anytime you are being controlled by any sort of programming that is
Yep.
outside yourself. It's something that I think is dangerous. And
Yep. Yeah. So as you know, my model, it's your mind, you should control it. And healthy parenting wants to acknowledge that each child is unique and that healthy parents want to help their child be their true self. Whereas authoritarian parents want obedience, they do corporal punishment, they program their kids to adopt the same belief system, which is very, very pseudo self oriented, not encouraging people to grow up and be an adult. And, for me, I have the influence continuum, as you know, from ethical to unethical. So when people ask me what's a cult, I whip out, the influence continuum for people with the video. And I say there are healthy cults and there are unhealthy cults. There are cults where you have informed consent, where you have your conscience, your critical thinking, your free will, you can leave without threats. And then the pseudo self with the bite model indoctrination, where you have to have this external authority figure and you're controlled through dogma and fear and all of that stuff. And in this modern world, especially this digital world that we're being ushered into at lightning speed, I just think we need to stay human and be with people in real life, hugging and cuddling and kissing and looking at each other's eyes. And even though it's nice to see you on pixels, I'd rather see you in real life and hang out, as Joe got to do with you, but maybe one day. But the point I'm trying to say is we need to stay human and realize that technology is here to serve us and not the other way around. And a lot of these tech corporations are looking at us as products that they can sell our information and sell us products. And that's undue influence, in my opinion, especially we don't have data privacy protection.
yes, I'll add that one of the things I really love about being a yoga instructor, and I teach I'm part of a yoga alliance who teaches people to become yoga teachers. And I think that learning to live inside our actual physical bodies in real time, and again, touching other bodies, asking for consent, always giving, students an option in private, like, in an opening pose with people's eyes closed, just put your hand up if you do not want to be touched, that kind of thing. It is really rare that somebody doesn't want to be touched because so many of us are craving safe touch. And when you have a safe teacher who knows how to do adjustments on shoulders or, in ways that make a person feel supported rather than violated, I think it's a really important practice. And it's something that in our particular cult was denied us, that touch was only given in violence and not in care. And I think learning how to touch ourselves, like when people talk about self-care, I think that a lot of it is to be able to find people who want to be in physical spaces with you. And I think that's something that our whole culture is suffering from right now. When we talk about the loneliness epidemic, there's plenty of people you can talk to online, but how many people have somebody in their actual geographic vicinity that they can spend human time with?
Yeah, an actual human friend. And what they're learning about children is you need real mirror neuron touch, like mother to child, not iPads or TV screens, but the brain needs to develop, and there's all kinds of information that's being transmitted that isn't zeros and ones and digitized stuff. But if I may come back to you and just comment, when you said that your cult only didn't encourage physical warmth and touch, just like corporal punishment and such, I just think that the skin is our biggest organ. and what I tell all my clients is it's like you need to live in your body. We're embodied minds. And I know you appreciate this as a yoga instructor, that we need to be in our body, in the here and now, with an internal locus of control, and listen to our bodies. If our body is telling us there's pain, we should ask our yoga instructor for an adjustment or a moderate, an alteration, a posture or something. Because I know when I started yoga, I would push myself and then get injured. And it was a revelation to realize, no. It's not doing what the instructor tells you to do. It's about being in touch with your body and realizing it needs to progress. Stretching is like a thing to learn. To be present. That and breathing. People are holding their breath all the time and they're not understanding how vital, that experience is.
I think if people knew how to live in their bodies, it would be a lot more difficult for high control groups to control their minds. I truly believe that. And at the beginning of yoga practice, as a teacher, it's very common to state something like, I am your guide in this experience, but I'm not your leader. You are your leader. You are your teacher. Listen to yourself. Anything I offer is a suggestion. It's never a mandate. You have permission to do anything that feels right for you. If I feel is unsafe, I will let you know. But ultimately, it's your own decision how you want to experience your body for our next 75 minutes together. And I think that for me, that was one of the biggest ways that I started healing from mind control and from coming out of a cult, is to allow myself the space to start listening to my body. And as someone who also suffered from eating disorders, and I know many, many people, especially women in this country, do, intuitive eating is something that is so foreign of a concept. Like the idea that you could actually listen to hunger, or like we started with the something for pleasure, whether it's for a cigar, or for, chocolate, or for anything, like to allow yourself to recognize what you want, when you're satiated, when to stop.
Exactly.
And it's really, capitalism I don't want to say it takes it away from us, but it tries to take it away from us, the ability to listen to ourselves. And we are looking then for answers outside of ourselves. And I think that's a huge issue globally, but especially here in the United States.
Yep. Did you happen to catch the Barbie movie by any chance?
I did.
So I did a little video rant about the Barbie movie, because I'm watching this movie and I'm going, oh, this is a story of someone born in a cult. and waking up and realizing that that's not what reality is. They have to figure out who their true self is. And when I said that online, people were like, "Oh, you're right. It really is, isn't it?" And they use the term deprogram in the movie itself. But what I wrote in the Cult of Trump book was that for me, Edward Bernays, and who was Freud's nephew, who was the first to put business and psychology together, as well as politics for that matter, and psychology together. He said, you don't sell people things or people, you sell them the need for those things. And so it created the advertising industry where they made women feel like if they weren't anorexic, they weren't beautiful. And so this external idealization that they could make a fortune selling diet remedies and other things. It's just, again, it's about who's defining what's healthy. And we have to go back to wisdom traditions and like thinking about the earth and thinking about our ancestors and our children, and just like we were meant to be in extended families, not in digital silos and stuff. And our brains are being altered. And there's just, for me, it's so refreshing to listen to you, with Joe, because there you are. You were raised in such an extremely impoverished, challenging environment, and you're a survivor and a thriver. You're a model for, you know what? We don't have to let our past define us. And in fact, we can use our experiences to cherish what it means to be free, and we can role model that. We don't need to walk around being ashamed and embarrassed that we had this experience. Like, we had this experience and it's time to move on and destigmatize it. So I'm really very grateful to you and all of the great stuff you're doing. And for me, creativity is definitively human. And people are saying, "Oh, look how creative AI is." No, it's not the same thing as human creativity. It just isn't. Tell me about your thoughts about creativity.
Well, I teach creativity, and I teach it as a tool, not only in media, but I specifically have a group we call the Chafe Review has become a creative collective. And each student, I just finished teaching this last semester, a group of students of all ages. There were several students in their 40s. So people are, it's a community college. So people come to college for all sorts of reasons. Mm-hmm. But some to, I think, reprogram themselves. They were in one path. They were doing a career. Maybe they got married young, had kids young, which happens a lot in our region still here. And they were maybe in the military, or they were in law enforcement, and they retired a little bit young, and they want to find a purpose in their life. And so moving into a space where we meet in person, and I insisted to teach the class in person, around a big table, it was just magical to watch. Students of all ages and genders looking at each other and holding each other accountable. We did morning pages, the technique that Julia Cameron teaches, where every morning you get up and you write 3 pages by hand without stopping. And so the students all committed to doing that. We had a conversation. I said, "Can you commit for 12 weeks?" It was a 18-week class, but for 12 weeks, can we do this? And can we see? And then we'll talk about our experience. And just watching how much they learn to trust themselves through unfiltered creativity, where they were writing not for an audience. Right. They were writing just to hear themselves or see with their thoughts in front of them. And then they all had to take themselves once a week on an artist date. And they were feeding their inner artist. So whatever they found, and then they would come to class and talk about what they did for their date, and they would give each other activities. But the rule is you had to go by yourself. And so you were dating yourself, and you weren't doing it for the performance of being with another person. And it was so delightful to just see that, students, there was a student, a woman in her 40s who has children who are, still very young, and she had never been to a movie by herself. And she went to go see Poor Things by herself. And that's the movie she chose to see. And she had seriously had never been in a movie theater in any sort of context like that, which I don't think
Wow.
is uncommon for women, especially to have never been in a public space like that. And then she took herself to coffee afterwards, and she started texting friends because she was allowed, to do that. But she said just how much she really felt that conversation she had with the screen was so different, because it wasn't, she wasn't filtering it through trying to please somebody else, but just trying to find what she really wanted in that moment.
Mm.
And I bring that up to say that I think that creative practices are kind of the antithesis to fear, because we're sold fear all the time. That's why the internet and the commercialization advertising works, is because, as you said, we're being sold a need. But the thing is, that is so fear-based, because we are told as women, for example, that if we keep our bodies small, that we are somehow more desirable, we're more feminine, we're more, but then we have to contain ourselves. But of course, it's a really difficult thing to do, because bodies naturally need expansion and they need growth. And as we age, we tend to put on weight. But if you make women ashamed of that, then they are afraid to be seen in public, for example. They're scared to go to movie theater by themselves. They're scared they're going to be judged or whatever it is as not being worthy because they don't have a companion. And so I think that what creativity does is allow us to find within ourselves some regenerative practices. And then we can share them with people. And I think real, true creativity just longs to be in connection. And collaboration is a big part of what creativity turns into. But you got to have something to bring to the table in order, like from yourself, in order to be part of a collaboration. You can't just go and digest it from somebody else. And unfortunately, that's what digital content does, is we become consumers of information rather
Right.
than in dialogue. And in great classrooms, they are places of dialogue with each other, not just with the teacher. And we all become learners and listeners and speakers.
So I need to just respond and say, so teaching people to sit down first thing in the morning and write 3 pages, just write, not type, not
Right.
dictate,
Physically.
actually
Mm-hmm.
write, is really a mind brain thing that's very important and valuable. Getting together with other people and sharing ideas in person is incredibly stimulating, because creativity is hearing other people's ideas and experiences, right? And the interactivity with your own. And I love the idea of a date, going out on a date by yourself for creativity. I never heard that one before. I guess for me, my first thought was, I guess I go to a museum, but I would never think of going to a movie as being a creative date. But then you explained she'd never been to one. But I love that concept as well. I want to share with you that I read a new book. It's a New York Times bestseller called Your Brain on Art. Have you heard of it?
I have heard of it, and I have not read it yet, but now I will.
So Susan Magsamen and Ivy Ross, and I read it. I listened to it actually the first time, and I attended an all-day conference in New York City on Saturday last, that they put on, bringing neuroscientists, bringing musicians, and showing how vital music and art is for brain health. Like, really saying what a big mistake to take arts out of education for children, and even proving that, language is musical. Like, if you just do the words without the intonations, and if the brain isn't, in a sense, trained with scales and understanding that there are all these different notes and different frequencies, because it's vibrations, right? Anyway, the conference is going to be, the videos are going to be put online. It was just mind blowing. And for me, I grew up playing the piano, and I rebelled at 15 because my father wanted me to continue learning classical, and I wanted to learn pop and Beatles, etc. And I rebelled and I stopped. But when I turned 60, I bought a keyboard, and I said, I'm going to go back to it. And Now I'm 70 and the keyboard's still there, but after going to this conference, I'm going to make a date with myself to spend time on the piano. And it's brain health and emotional health to tune in. And they were actually playing like musicians and charting their brain activity and just listening to the musician. There's an entrainment, like you go into a kind of a trance to tune into the music and get into the flow of the music, and it's just so human and wonderful. I highly recommend it.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm going to check back in with you and ask about your keyboarding, because that's another thing that we did in the class is we had accountability partners, just check-ins where you would get a chance to talk about your experience outside of the classroom and someone reminds you, hey, you said you were going to start working on
Would
that,
you be
Steve.
willing to do that?
Yes, I
would
will.
really appreciate that, because
Yeah.
it really is. I need to make it a priority for me, for my well-being, because being online, doing all this traumatic stuff and cult stuff all the time is hard.
Yeah.
It's very wearing.
Yes. Yes. I feel like I can really relate to that, having spent the last year talking about these things. My daughter is a trauma therapist, actually. She does a lot of work online. She has a large following. And she, in her personal life, she has practices where she encourages her clients to do this too, but she takes walks without headphones. So even though she loves music, it's a big part of, she loves going to concerts, but she goes on walks and listens for the birds and, walks her dog, watches, and she just encourages people to touch things that you experience on the walk. If you are in a position to literally smell a flower or touch, a tree or do whatever, but be in your senses. And, but also I was thinking about the practices of music. She draws, and she says that just if you can find some creative expression, and it doesn't have to be keyboarding, but that is definitely one, because it's using your mind, but it's using it through your body. You're channeling, the energy from your mind through your body. That's what any sort of art or even writing by hand does, is it uses our body to process. Yep. And I think that is one of the things that I wish that I had understood when I was leaving the cult, is how important that is. And I think yoga does that. I have just started doing belly dancing. I think belly dancing is a really rich tradition, and to think about, just ways of expressing yourself that are not brain centered.
Yep. So I just think this is, I have a big audience of former members, and I think this is so, positive, part of the influence continuum, about really tuning into creativity and into our bodies and into yoga, into healthy practices. And one of the things for me as a takeaway from this workshop on your brain on art was just that before the Moonies, my central identity was as an artist.
Wow.
My mother was an 8th grade art teacher in Brooklyn. And my parents were both musicians, and I wrote poetry. That's what I did before the Moonies, when then they had me throw out my poetry, and then I got out, and then I went into psychology and became a therapist. And yes, I started writing poetry again about a year after I left. But in my head, if you ask Steve, who are you? I'm like, I'm an artist. Yeah, I do therapy, and I'm a cult expert too. But this workshop, this day was just like, I need to go back to who I was before and start doing artwork. I actually had a rapidograph when I was little, and I would do these intricate things. I hesitate to get up and show you one I found recently, because it's so bizarro. But anyway, I just think anyone listening, if you've had this experience, grown up in an authoritarian family or a cult or an authoritarian country, and China, Russia, etc., and came away from it, it's really a valuable use of your attention and your time and effort to find mentors. And I see you as a teacher, as an instructor and a sharer of your journey. And I can only imagine that if I'm sitting at a table with you and we're discussing writing, I can only imagine you being encouraged to people about whatever they do and not saying, that's terrible. Like, that sucks. I can't imagine you ever saying that to a student.
Well, of course not. The creative process, first of all, is always like from the heart. And so anything that from the heart doesn't suck. I'll add that when I was teaching in the men's prison, I was teaching a creative writing poetry class. So I was teaching men who are incarcerated to express themselves through poetry, which is really challenging in that environment because, first of all, they're obviously so locked down, but also these men have often come from very violent backgrounds that have denigrated creative expression as feminine. And they were really hesitant. And in fact, some of them wrote me notes right at the beginning and said, fine, I'll write it for you, but I'm not, because they needed the class. They were actually getting academic credit. And they were in a cohort where they were required to take this class in order to graduate with their degree in business. But this was their creative class. And it hadn't been ever done before in this prison to bring in a creative class. They were taking accounting and other things. And the man who asked me to come in and do it, it took him a little bit of time to convince me because I was a little nervous. I'd been teaching in the women's prison and I was a little nervous about working in that environment with men, all men. And one of the things the men would say is, okay, lady, basically, fine, I'll do this thing for you, but I'm not going to talk in class and you don't understand. We cannot talk about our feelings with other inmates, And I thought it was a very valid point. I was like, oh, wow, maybe I should have rethought this because I thought they can't share like these without feeling super vulnerable. And it was highly problematic. There was multiple, races and ethnicities in the class. And they had a lot of, they're more segregated in their cells and things where they live. And so you're bringing them in situations where it could really be threatening for them to share themselves. So I had to go through a lot of rethinking about how to bring this kind of expression into that space every week. And I just met with them once a week and we would meet for 3 hours, one night a week. And by the end, and I can talk about the process, but we probably don't have time in this podcast, but I can tell you at the end, I've given them lots of prep for this. I said, here's my vision. We're going to have a Quaker circle. And it's basically where we're going to move these chairs into a circle. And as you want to share poetry, it's kind of a popcorn thing. You share it and no one's allowed to comment on it. I'm not going to comment on it. You say what you want to say. You read whatever poem or one line from your poetry. It just has to be yours, not someone else's. And then somebody else will speak and somebody else will speak. And when nobody speaks, I'll close it out again. But all we're doing is opening ourselves to listening. And that was exactly at the beginning something they said they were incapable of doing. But we've been working all semester and we'd be doing rap and we'd be doing, listening to music and doing all this. And I think it's probably the most magical experience of my entire teaching career is that these men, every single man in that room spoke in that circle. Like it was a pretty small group by the end who were passing the class. There was about 18 of them. And every single one of them shared some of their poetry in that circle. And then at the end, they really did stand up and then they did something they weren't supposed to do. They said, may I shake your hand? And some of them wanted to shake hands because they were not allowed to touch at all. And I looked at they don't call them guards, they call them COs, but the correctional officer. And he just kind of looked the other way. But the thing is, all of them, if they didn't shake hands, they went they said, thank you, thank you for giving me this. And it was so amazing because they didn't have to do that to pass the class. It wasn't something I forced on them. I said, I have a vision that we can do that in our 18 weeks together, that we can get here. And it might be uncomfortable along the way, but I believe that this is a self-contained space of safe people. And whatever else is going on in the rest of your life in this prison, if we could honor this here, I'm not asking you to take it anywhere else, And I think ultimately they felt safe enough to share. And I think that, talk about an authoritarian regime, a prison is a very, very authoritative.
Right model. Give people a number, clothing, rigid rules and regulations. It really is the opposite of helping people get better.
Right. And in fact, a lot of the correctional officers did not want us in their teaching. They were very adamantly opposed and would say that to me. I hope you get hurt, and all that. And you have to sign a contract
That's
that
a
says that.
terrible thing to say.
I know it is, but I believe that they're saying it from a place of fear where they're just like, listen, if you humanize them, they are going to start fighting back in a sense. I did not meet one single officer in there who wanted the educational program. They felt that it was, and I'm not saying there aren't any anywhere, but that wasn't my experience. And so it was just a really difficult environment. And I had so much, obviously, compassion, but also just overwhelming fear of thinking, what I don't want to do them a disservice. I don't want to make them more
Right.
vulnerable, and how do you give them expression and then it's taken away,
Right.
like every time they go in and out of that environment. And I think ultimately that's what they had to decide for themselves is, am I willing to come in this space and express this part of myself and then go out there and code switch and
Right.
deny that part of myself? And I think they do what I think we all have to do. That's just in a more extreme environment is we don't share ourselves with everyone.
Right.
We choose the people in our lives who, and if you are any of your listeners still in a high control environment, you may not be ready to leave. But if you can start giving yourself those creative moments,
Yeah.
even in little increments, you will be much more prepared to take the steps necessary to get out. And you're all, as listeners, fortunate if you're in a position where you can get out.
Yes. Amen. I just being willing to stretch yourself, being willing to put yourself out and take risks and do something really courageous, which is go into a men's prison. I have only one experience. I may have mentioned this to you in our last interview, but Jordan Harbinger, who's a famous podcaster whose show I was on, and we become friends, had a 40th birthday party at a maximum security men's prison in California, invited people to come celebrate, pay money to this program that was giving inmates an education. There was a credentialed educational university. I don't remember the name of it now, but I got to sit with, people who've committed murders and rapes and hear their stories. And these people wanted to change. And the environment was the gangs at the max prison looked down on them because they wanted to get an education and such. And I met people who had been in isolation for 10 years in within walls for 10 years, and it boggles my mind that people can survive in those types of extreme environments. And again, it was so awe-inspiring, uplifting, but also I just felt so grateful for how lucky I am and all the blessings that I've had and the good fortune I've had. And I want to say to our listeners, people who have purpose, people who do fulfilling things, that's far better than happiness. It's far better than making just, I want to make money. It's like doing things where you're touching people and changing lives is truly moving and validating. And you're a great role model for that as well, Michelle. Wow. So I'd like to come back to Joe Rogan again, just because he has such a huge platform. Were there any things that were surprises for you or parts of the conversation that you cherish or of the interactions?
I found the whole thing surprising, but I went in with an open mind and just said, I am going to follow the experience. I didn't bring notes or, I had been told that he doesn't use notes and that, you just show up and have a genuine conversation. So this is something that I have a friend who says frequently, and I'm sure you've heard this expression, but less preparation, more presence.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that we don't prepare in life, but sometimes in environments, and this is also true teaching in a men's prison, you come into the environment and you say, I will be fully present for whatever takes place here. So that's how I showed up for Joe and said, he's going to lead this conversation. This is his house. This is his show. This is his his community of guests, and I'm going to come into the space and have the conversation that he wants to have. And I can quote a couple things from the conversation I found engaging, but I want to say first that one of the most interesting things since I've done Rogan is how many women, because everyone kept telling me he has all male audience, mostly male audience, blah, 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 mostly male guests, mostly male audience, which of course is statistically true. That is a fact. But there are some women who listen, and so many of those women contacted me and they said, thank you for telling your story from a female perspective, and then they tell their story. They tell me a version of it. People find me on Instagram, they find me on Substack, but they'll write me, some people find my email and they'll send me a note and they'll say, here's what happened to me and some of them are in high control, like small family structures, like being a housewife in a semi-abusive or extremely abusive relationship, psychologically abusive or beyond. And they say, I felt that I didn't have any ability to change. And they said, it's just so nice to see a normal person, like whatever they deem that, but like, here you are, this just normal woman, and Joe's willing to talk to you. And I'm not a celebrity. So what's normal? I don't really think there is such a thing as normal, but I always felt like a weirdo because I had this different life experience that I didn't want to talk about. And then after writing the book, I found myself in situations like Joe, which is a huge platform, to talk about something that I used to be very, very, very ashamed to talk about. And so my experience with Joe is that one is he is very open-minded. He doesn't necessarily agree with it. He didn't even, there were things I didn't agree with, like his stance on wolves and all that, but I was like, this isn't the time to tell him that I think that reintroducing wolves into national parks is a really good idea. And I used to live in Colorado, et cetera. So there were times I didn't say things that I really believed because I just didn't think it was going to facilitate, meaningful connection. And also, I'm not an expert on that, and I hesitate sometimes to make a statement, even though I think that I probably know at least as much about it as he does, I think. But I think that when we were talking about the Bible and we were talking about cults, and he said that this is not a direct quote, but he said that people can leave cults, they're not trying to keep them in. And I said, I don't know how well I explained this at the time, but it was really interesting to me that he thought that cults like get you in and then trap you, as opposed to basically making it a privilege to be part. And I know that there's different high control groups have different methods, but so many, and this is true in families too, they tell you basically the threat is if you leave, you can't have contact with us. Like you will be denied the sense of belonging that this group gives you, and you will be, no longer in the light of our community. And since we all crave belonging in a community, that's a really big threat for, it's dangerous. It feels dangerous. You're very scared to lose that. But what people feel inside of the cult is they feel like they're special because they belong to this small group. Maybe there's one leader who knows the truth, and you feel like, if I get to be next to that, I'll be part of that. And so it's very interesting. Because Joe's obviously an intelligent man, that he hadn't had that experience, probably because he's always been a very independent, thinker and all that. But he'd never been in the experience where someone had told him, like, you can leave, but here's why you don't want to. And I think that there's a lot of us who think we have more freedom than we do, whether it's an online or AI or anything else, because we think, I'm choosing to get on and look addictively at this information that's showing up on social media, whatever. But it's again, just more of a mind control tactic that keeps bringing you back. You could put the phone down, ostensibly you could, but you're so motivated not to put the phone down because you're going to miss the FOMO. You're going to miss out on whatever really important stuff is going on there. And so you just keep getting drawn back in. And I think that's what he was talking about when he said that, like, it is a mental illness. I guess it just depends on how you define mental illness. But this idea that there are so many forms of mind control that go on in our culture, and the way that he really normalized that, because and also, just the way that we have our mainstream cultural religion is Judeo-Christian in this country. Like that is the one that predominantly we are told the stories of. And the way that is used in terms of fear tactics through how we sell things, et cetera. But yeah, just the idea that he looked at it as a bigger concept instead of saying like, well, it's a pretty rare thing that people know. He understood that it's an incredibly common thing, mind control.
Yeah. And, as a mental health professional, I think people who are in these mind control groups do have a dissociative disorder, like an actual mental illness where if they're turned into someone that isn't them, like if they convert to a whole new belief system and believe somebody's, a prophet or an apostle and they need to follow blindly, otherwise they'll be possessed by demons. So there's the fear of being shunned, but there's also the phobia programming where people, literally are afraid of losing their mind or committing suicide or whatever because of what was put inside their head. But there are many different types of cults, and there are many different types of extreme cults, and then there are different levels within the cult where you can be a fringy member and not feel as much abuse as some of the upper level people where you're not allowed to have sex and you have to have a certain diet and clothing and you can't go to your parents' funeral or your brother's wedding and that sort of thing. So that's really interesting that you heard from women. I'm not surprised. Any other reflections of things that came out of it or whatever? And by the way, I do think you're, famous. So you may not think of yourself as a celebrity, but.
No, I don't. I definitely don't. The conversation about the Apocrypha was interesting to me. And that was, something maybe I brought to the conversation, but it was through his questioning that got me to think about what we allow and what we don't allow as truth, not only in religion or in culture communities, but just the canonization in general of what we consider education, in the schools, what we test people on. I've long said, and this only sort of tangentially came up with Joe, but, we don't teach personal money management. It's almost as if that would be too empowering for young people if we really gave them the tools to understand the system to which we are all being held, just even what adjusted rate mortgages or just things like that, or what escrow is compared to, what rent and leasing and owning and all of that. And, but I think the disempowerment that happens when either whether it's one person or one small group is controlling the information that we are given access to. And so I think when you think about the biblical Apocrypha, that there were all these books of the Bible that were not chosen to be included in the canon of what we call now the Bible, which is really 66 books in the Protestant tradition. And to think that there were many, many more, and just that he was willing to talk about, and when he was talking about Lilith or all these other things, I was like, okay, that's fine. But also that's not the stories people are being taught. If that was a story, then we would have a different culture if that's what we were fearing. But there was a reason that wasn't chosen to be put in the canon. And so I think that when it comes to the larger picture, and I think this is what people judge Joe for too, is like, well, if he allows people to say things that other people don't like, is he part of the problem? And I would say, here's the thing. If we don't allow people to say publicly views that we disagree with, if we don't do that, then we're trying to control the narrative too. And I think that's always a difficult question, is like, how much freedom do we give anyone to speak, and who controls what we consider truth? I tend to say something is a truth. So here's a truth, like not the truth. That's just a expression that I choose, because I don't think, you can state a fact, but the fact may not be the truth. It might just be a version. It can be a truth without being the truth.
Yeah, I agree with you. I would say, because I did my doctoral work on updating the law regarding undue influence. So my position with free speech is the law is really clear that if you're in a crowded theater and yell fire and there's no fire, meaning you lied, and people are rushing to the exits and get injured, that should be criminal. But the key is, if there is a fire, you're obligated to tell people we got to move to the exits. Don't scream fire, ideally, because people will panic. but you're obligated to say, hey, there's smoke, there's fire, we need to leave. And that's where I think the notion of um, alternative facts is bullshit, if I can use a term. Um, if something's a fact, then it's a fact, and you can't say it's your model of reality. It's not my model of reality. Like gravity is real, physics is real, and global climate crisis is real. Even though the fossil fuel industry has spent hundreds of millions of dollars trying to create doubt and confusion and say there's no proof, just like big tobacco was saying there's no evidence that smoking causes cancer, when they knew that it causes cancer, not in everybody, but most people. It's harmful, especially in large amounts, not a cigar every once a few months. But the point is that we really need to teach people that science matters. The earth is not 6,000 years old. Women should have equal rights. Children should have rights. They should not be hit with paddles and belts and beaten. Other civilized countries have made it a crime. We know it injures children's brains by hitting them. So, forgive my rant, but I think that back to having different opinions, I think that understanding the notion of confirmation bias, which is the idea that unconsciously we're sorting information that's coming our way for what already confirms what we believe. I think there's a real danger to not periodically stepping out of your model and listening to a completely different point of view and seeing if it holds any weight or merit, because your opinions may need to shift, and rightly so. So I love Adam Grant's book, Think Again. I don't know if
Yeah,
you've caught that one,
I've read
but
that.
it's like separate your ego from your beliefs, pursue truth, and whatever's evidence based, change your mind. And it's part of growing. Like, let's learn. Let's not memorize. Let's learn and grow and be creative and evolve.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm delighted that he wanted to know about cults. I'm delighted that you were willing to share, and I just want to highlight just how much I love former members just saying it out loud. Yeah, I was in a cult, and I didn't have my freedom, and I was abused, and I didn't get an education, and then model that there's life after cult, and because there's so many people who are walking around ashamed. I was watching the recent Netflix documentary that came out on the it's called Dancing with the Devil, the 7M TikTok dance cult. And the second episode, former members are like, I'm ashamed to say I was in a cult, but it really was a cult. And I'm like, yes, yay.
Yeah.
Let's just have more people just saying, yeah, I trusted the wrong person. I got deceived. I trusted. I allowed them to make a lot of money off of me, etc. And time to move on.
Yeah. The shame is such a big part of the way that I controlled myself after leaving the cult by being so ashamed. I not intentionally, of course, but didn't create enough room for growth in my own life because I needed to keep that part of I felt I needed to keep that part of myself hidden. And so I do feel that it is it's an honor and a privilege, but also a mission of mine to talk about it now and to encourage, especially the younger people who are reaching out, but of any age really, who say, I was really scared to talk about this. Thank you for listening. And, the first thing I say back is thank you for sharing. And then can you find someone else to also share this with? Like, who else can you talk to in your life? And So many of us carry around shame of things that even if we did participate in choosing something that wasn't good for us, then that's because we didn't have the information that we have now.
Right.
And if we can't grow unless we recognize where we've been and how far we've come, and just continually to put ourselves in situations where we are willing to, I think, hear something that we didn't know, whether it's a different opinion or, as information changes around us, opening our minds and then being willing to say, I changed my mind about that.
Yeah.
Like I used to, I voted Republican when I came out of the cult because that authoritarian regimes were all that I understood.
Right.
People have all sorts of reasons for changing their minds politically and in every other way. And we
Yeah,
should embrace that.
exactly. And as we're wrapping up, I just want to comment that you described your daughter becoming a therapist and a trauma expert, and I can't help but imagine that she learned some stuff from mom. So talk a
I
little
don't
bit
think she.
about parenting and your daughter, because it sounds like she's very cool.
She's very cool, and she's I feel like she's my teacher. I think I don't think she would think she learned a lot from me other than what not to do, but she's my oldest, and I feel that I was still very much a child when I had her. But I did encourage her to speak her mind from the time she was a very early talker. So from the time she was 1, and by the time she was 2, she was reciting poetry and just doing different things, and she couldn't sleep at night. So her dad and I gave her a cassette player where, a really child's one where you could put in these tapes, and we gave her a bunch of classical music, and we gave her storybooks, and I would read her storybooks on the tapes, but then also, other people's, and she was allowed in the night to do it as much as she wanted. She has a twin sister, and her twin sister could sleep and she couldn't. And there was a point at which, my twins were 1 when I had another baby. And so I just had a bunch of little kids, and I could not stay up all night with my now therapist daughter. And so she would put these tapes in and she would listen to these stories, and I empowered her to feel that she had the right, instead of locking her in her crib or whatever. I just put the mattress on the floor, said, you can get up, you can listen to your tapes, whatever. If you need me, here I'm where I am, but also mama needs to sleep. So wake me up if you need something, but also, this is available to you. And I think that now, what she does, and I think that she feels that I wasn't healed when she was raised. And I think that she probably has a lot of truth about the ways in which I wasn't able to maybe give the children access to the language of emotion very well, because I was a little bit repressed with my own emotions. And I think that is very, very true. And so she's much better at expressing emotions, expressing anger. She thinks that women were taught to deny their anger. And that was completely true of me. I didn't know how to express it. So I couldn't get angry and fight back against systems. Instead, I was a lot more compliant. And so it's been fascinating to watch how she has embodied. She helps people on journeys using prescribed medications from, if doctors give various what we used to call street drugs, but but she helps guide ketamine journeys and things like that, and she's licensed to do that. So she does it in California in a way that is very healing, but it helps. She says helps free people from the control of their minds. And I think it's super interesting, because then it puts them in a space where it expands them to think outside of a box. Yep. And I think there's so many ways to do that. And I think we all just need to keep trying until we find the ways that make us feel more free, shackles off, that we are no longer holding ourselves in prisons.
Yeah, fantastic. And I personally think therapists doing ketamine is the way to go, not just self-administering, psychedelics and such. Michelle Dowd, thank you. Any last words? What a great talk. And great.
Thank you for having me on again. And also, it's always such a joy and privilege to talk to you. Your work is very meaningful to me personally, and not just with Joe, but I recommend you all the time to survivors who reach out and ask me, what are resources? And I said, you need to check out Steve Hassan and the Bite Model and, other Undue Influence and et cetera. And I will add that if anyone wants to read Forager, it is available very inexpensively now in paperback. And also, I'm the one who narrates the Audible version, which is available for free if you're a Spotify if
I
you're on
listened to
Spotify.
it on Audible, and I got the physical book, and they're both really valuable because there's different part of the brain when you're listening and looking and
Yeah.
such. So I highly recommend that as well. And you have a Instagram, you have a Substack. I'm actually starting on Substack myself,
Nice. I'll
so
follow you.
we'll connect there. And your
Yeah, I'd like to put a
special.
link to the Substack in your show notes if you have time.
Absolutely.
I'll
We're
send
going to
that to you
do a
today.
blog, and I'll let you approve the blog, and absolutely. And thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
It's been a pleasure.
Pleasure.
Appreciate you.
Steve Hassan here. You know, it's been decades since my family rescued me from the Moonies. I've been at this for over 47 years. The need has never been greater. If you're able, please consider hitting the super thanks button below, and it'll help us to do better. Every penny will help us toward our goal of educating the planet about undue influence. Remember, it's your mind, only you should control it.